Hello there and welcome. In the last few episodes, we've been adding different things into our game, for example, the bow and arrow, enemies, players spawned, and we're going to continue adding more and more things as we continue with the series, but you should know that these things will be very specific because we already covered all the major core systems in a survival game. So we have crafting, we have an inventory system, we have farming, we have fishing, we can buy things, we can sell things, we have stats, we have weapons, we have enemies. So we did cover all the major systems you can usually find in a survival game. Now, a lot of you are asking very specific things to show you, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to choose one of these requests and I'm going to show you each episode how to add them. So this will be the plan for the rest of the series, but in this episode I want to go back to our crafting system because it's not working as it should, and that's just because we did a lot of changes in our inventory system since we created the crafting system. If you remember, we created the crafting system in the beginning of the series, and since then we did different changes, and the most important one is changing our inventory system to become a stackable inventory system. So the crafting system will not work as it should. And also, if we actually look at the class, we can see that it's very messy, okay? This is not how I would create a crafting system if I would create it today, right? Because we created this crafting system maybe 2 years ago. So we're going to make our crafting system much more efficient. And the first thing we want to do is create scriptable objects for each one of these blueprints, okay? We don't want to have these classes inside. We want to have scriptable objects that will hold all this data. And this will be the first thing that we want to do. Next, we also want to basically remove these items from the UI, because if we go to one of our categories, for example, the tools categories, we can see that we have these items here and they're hard coded. It means that each item that we add, we need to manually go and copy this and position it. And then we need to add all the different references, right? So this is not efficient. We want all of this to happen automatically. We also don't want to have references to all the different blueprints, right? For the buttons and for the requirements, it doesn't make any sense. These references should go on the actual panel and the UI should deal with this, not the actual crafting system. So the first thing we need to do is create a scriptable object. I already created it. You simply create a new class, a new script, and inside we're going to create a new asset menu just so we can create it from our Unity menu. So you add this part over here, and then you're going to change this into a scriptable object. So it's going to be a mono behavior, just change this into a scriptable object, and then add all of these. We're going to have a name, we're going to have a number to produce, because sometimes we can produce several items and not just one item. Then we also have a number of requirements. We have the first requirement and its amount, the second requirement and its amount, and we also have an enum for the blueprint category, because we have different screens, right? We have the tools, we have the refinement, we have the survival category. So we have all of these different categories, and we want each one of our blueprints to be a part of one of these categories. So we're going to create this enum, and then we're going to have this enum type inside of the blueprint so we can know where it belongs. So now if we go to our crafting system, we're going to add a list of these blueprints data. So public list, blueprint data, and here we're going to hold all the different blueprints. Now we're going to remove more of these things later, but for now we can remove this part. So let's just comment this by pressing on Ctrl+KC, and this will comment this out. Obviously we're going to have some errors, but we're going to deal with them just because we don't have these blueprints anymore. So now that we added a reference to all of these blueprints data, we can basically start adding these blueprints, but we're going to do this in a moment. The next thing we want to deal with is we don't want this to be hard-coded inside. We want these panels, these blueprints, to be generated automatically when we start the game based on this list of blueprints. It will basically go over this entire list and will check, okay, we have an axe, we have a fishing rod, so on. So it's going to loop over this list and it's going to generate these panels in their own categories. So the axe will go into the tools, let's say what we have here, planks will go into this category, and all of this will happen automatically. So let's see how to do this with the tools category, and then we're going to do this for the rest. So first of all, we're going to ignore this axe panel. We're just going to, let's just leave it here. We're going to right click on the category and we're going to add some kind of scroll view. We're going to click here, Alt, and stretch it, and then we're going to position it here. So we want our panels to be created somewhere here. We want to have some kind of margins. And then we're also going to take the anchors and position them exactly like this. Now inside of the scroll view, first of all, let's remove this color. Let's remove this image. And inside, we're going to expand the viewport, content, and inside the content, we want to drag this so it will cover the entire area. And we're going to add a grid layout group. And this will allow us to basically instantiate different items and position them in an organized order. Now we're going to take this axe that we had before and we're going to rename this to Blueprint Prefab UI. So this will be the actual UI that will be instantiated and placed here. So if we drag it into the content, we can see how it will look, and this is not nice. So we're going to click on the content and change the cell size. Y will be about 300 and X will be 150, maybe 200. We're going to change the constraint to be fixed column count, and we're going to set only 3 different columns. So if we copy this, if we duplicate the prefab, this is how it's going to look. Now we can also remove the scroll bars. So let's just delete this one and this one. So this is how it's going to look. So if we add more items, they're going to be instantiated like this. And then they're going to basically be instantiated underneath, and we're going to be able to scroll and find them. Now you can see that they're not fitting exactly. So maybe we can take this entire scroll view and expand it a bit. And now we can see the entire border. We can also click on the scroll view on the content and set this to be start axis, no, start corner. It's going to be upper left. Child alignment will be upper left. So that's fine. We can play around with this, maybe upper center or something like this. So it will be in the middle. And now that we know that everything looks fine, we're simply going to delete all of this and only keep one of them, the original one, and we're going to basically drag it and make a prefab out of it. Now we also don't want them to appear like this, so we're just going to set the child alignment to be upper left, so it will start here. And now we're going to change this blueprint prefab a bit. First of all, we don't want to have an actual name. This will be set from the script. We also don't want these. We can leave them, but these will change from the script, okay? These will be instantiated dynamically when we start the game. Now we can also remove it from the scene. So we have this blueprint here, and we're going to rename this content over here to be tools container, okay? So each category will have the same setup. We're going to create a scroll view. You can even duplicate this and add this into the different categories, but each one will have this scroll view, and inside we're going to have this contents container, and this will basically instantiate items inside. So we renamed this to tools container because each one will have its own container, and then we can add a reference into our crafting system. Now, before we do this, we also want to add a script on our actual blueprint. So we click on the blueprint and we're going to add a new script and we're going to name it blueprint UI. And this will be a new script. And inside we're going to have so this will be the actual data for this UI. Now we see these errors because we need to import the namespace. And again, if you're using TextMesh Pro, you can use the TextMesh Pro, this one, okay? But because we did not use this, so our text is a simple text, this is not the TextMesh Pro, so we're going to use the regular text. But again, you can use TextMesh Pro if you want. Now that we have these references for the Blueprint UI, we can simply click on the Blueprint UI and it's not going to get updated because we have these errors in our crafting system. So let's just comment this out. Just for now. Let's make sure we don't have any more errors. Let's save. And now we don't have any more errors, so it's going to compile and we can see all of these references. So we're going to take this rec1, drag it here, rec2, drag it here, and for the craft button, we're going to take the button and drag here, but we're going to enable it because we want to see it, okay? So now we have all of these references inside the actual Blueprint UI. And all of this is inside of this blueprint, okay? This prefab. Another thing that we may need is inside the Blueprint UI, we want a reference to the actual sprite. So we're going to have public, say, image or sprite. Let's say image. And we're going to go into our blueprint data and also add the sprite. So public sprite, and this will be the image for the blueprint, okay? So we're going to save this, we're also going to save this, and now we're going to click on our prefab, and we're going to drag this component, this image component, into this slot over here, okay? Another thing that we may want to do is change the actual text for this. So also for this, we're going to add a reference. So public text. Item name. So these are references for the actual UI. So they're not going to contain the data. The data will be here, and then we're going to set the data on the UI. So item name. And then over here, we can simply drag our text into the item name because this text over here is the actual, let's name it item name. Okay, so the item name will go into the item name, rec1, craft button. We can also rename this to craft button. And the image will be the image. So we want to change all of this data from the code. Now we want to create our first prefab, our first scriptable object. We can place it into a specific folder, but for now, let's just right click, create, crafting, blueprint, and we're going to name it X. And here we can see all the data. So all the data will be contained in this one scriptable object and not like we had it before over here in a very inefficient way. Okay, this is much more efficient. So we're going to add the item name. It will be X, number to produce 1, requirements 2. And let's see what we had. We had 3 sticks and 3 stones, right? So we're going to have stone 3 and stick 3. And the sprite will be the sprite that we had for the axe. So axe, this one, I think. and the category is the tools category. So now all of this information is stored inside of this scriptable object, and now all we need to do is go to our crafting system and simply add this scriptable object into this list. And not this one, this blueprint data list. Okay? And now we can see that we have one axe. So now your job will be to create more and more of these. Let's say what we had, plank. Right, we had this plank over here. We needed one log and it would produce 2 planks. So again, you should just do this for each one. This is a plank. Number to produce 2, requirements 1, log, we need 1 log, and the sprite will be this plank. Maybe we have another one. Let's just use this for now. And this will go into refine because it's a refinement. And if we go into our refine category, we can see it over here. Okay, so we had another image. Let's see, plank, image, this one. So let's just copy the name, WDB. Let's go back here, WD. Okay, this one. So we just need to create all of our blueprints this way, create them as scriptable objects, okay? And they will contain all the data. And of course, we should go to our crafting system and make sure we add the plank as well and any other blueprints. So all the different blueprints will go into the crafting system, into this blueprint data list. Okay, this is the list we created here. And we also want to have a reference to the actual container, right? To this container here that we created, so we can instantiate these prefabs into this area, into this panel. So for this, we're going to enter into our crafting system and we're going to create a public okay, because we want to have references to each one of these containers so we can instantiate the items. Now that we're going to save this, we can simply go to our crafting system and drag these containers. So for now, let's just do this for the tools container because it's the only one we have. So we simply drag the container into this reference over here. Another thing we need to do is have a reference to the actual prefab so we can instantiate this prefab. So inside, let's also add a public game object prefab. Let's name it blueprint prefab. Or maybe blueprint UI prefab, something like that. And now we can drag it as well. So we have this blueprint UI prefab. Let's just drag it inside. And when we do this for the rest of the categories, we can add all the different containers. And now we also have this. So now we want to add all the different methods that are actually going to instantiate these prefabs into the containers. So inside the crafting system, we're going to call a method inside the start method, right? When we start the game, we're going to call a method called populate blueprints. We're going to generate this method. And inside, we're going to have basically a switch that will check which kind of blueprint we have and where we should initialize it. So let's see how it looks. Let's rename this to blueprint data list, okay? So we know it's a list, blueprint data list. And then we're going to loop over it. Okay, so we're basically looping over all the different blueprint data. So for example, we have our axe and our plank, and these are inside this list. Now, because we changed the name, we probably should also add them again. Oh no, okay, maybe they will be missing, so add them again here. But we're basically looping over this list, and then we're checking if the category of the blueprint is one of these, for example, the tools category, then simply make the parent to be the tools container, and then instantiate this prefab into the parent. Okay, so it's very simple. We also want to get a reference from this blueprint UI over here, and we want to initialize all the data. So we are going to have this method inside the blueprint UI script. We're going to pass in the blueprint data, so we're going to get the data into the UI. So now we're going to open our blueprint UI, and inside we're going to add some methods. First of all, this public void initialize, and inside we're going to receive a blueprint data, and we're going to say that data, this blueprint data is blueprint data. Maybe we can rename this to be data. Okay, data. We also want to call a method update UI. We're going to generate it. And we also want to take our craft button, on click, and we want to add a listener. And call this craft item method. So this will be another method inside. Okay, this method here. So inside the craft item, we're simply going to open our crafting system instance and use this craft from blueprint. And this is a method that we need to create, and we're going to pass in the data. Now, before we create this method, we also want to basically update the UI. So this will be a bit longer. So this method can look a bit complicated, but it's very simple. We get the total item count from the inventory for both of our requirements. For example, we have stick and we have stone. So we're going to use this method to check how many of these items we have inside the inventory, and we're going to store the count over here. Then we're going to basically set the data on the text itself. So we're going to set this data over here. You can see 3 stone, and then we have this thing. I also added this X, but we basically print this exact thing over here, so the player can know how many items he needs and how many items he actually has, okay? So this is just a shorter way, because we check if we have more than 0, then we're going to set this string. But if we have less than 0 or 0, then we're going to set an empty string, okay? It's a short if statement. It's a ternary if, okay? And then we do this for the second requirement. And we also check if we have enough. So if we have more than the amount, and we have more than the amount too. And also if we only have one requirement. So if we have one requirement, it will only check this and it will make this true. But if we have 2 requirements, that will check this thing, or it will check if we have one requirement. Because if we only have one requirement, we don't need to check this thing, right? We only need to check this thing. So in both cases, this will be true. And then all we are going to do is make the crafting button interactable, and we are going to make it interactable based on all of these bools. So if this is true and this is true, and if we have enough room inside the inventory. So we're going to use this method, check slots available, to check the amount of items we want to produce and basically make sure that we have enough room inside the inventory. So that's all we are doing inside of this update UI method. Another thing, we also want to set the actual sprite. So when we initialize, we're going to say item name text, and this will be the data, blueprint data name. And we also want to do this for the image. So image sprite will be the blueprint data sprite. So this will happen only once, but this will happen each time we update the UI. For example, when we pick up a new item. Now we need to create this method inside the crafting system. So we're going to generate method. And inside the crafting system, we're going to implement this method. So in this method, we're basically going to craft an item from the blueprint. And we're going to get the data, we're going to play the sound. So this method is very similar to a method that we had before. This one here, craft any item. This is what we had before, but we don't want to use it anymore. We also don't want to use this craft delay. And we're going to keep this calculate. Let's just take it and bring it here. So instead of calling this, let's call it here. So this new craft from blueprint will play the crafting sound. It will start this craft delay, and that's just because we wanted to have some kind of delay before we are adding into the inventory. And then we check the amount of requirements and we remove the items from the inventory based on the requirements. So if we have one or more, remove the requirement 1, and if we have 2, then remove the requirement 2. Then we also want to calculate this recalculate list method, so our inventory system will have a new list of items, because at this point we removed all the items. Now this may not be required anymore because inside the remove item, we are also recalculating the list. So we're going to check if we even need this. But at this point, we don't want to have all of these methods anymore. And we actually also can remove this refresh needed items method, because we are not checking how many we have here and then we're setting the button to be active. We're doing all of this inside the blueprint UI, right? We're doing this over here. So now we can get rid of this very long and nasty method. This entire refresh needed items. For now, I'm just going to comment this out, but we're going to get rid of it in a moment. And you're going to see that this class is going to be much shorter. Now, we also don't see this, so we don't want to use it anymore. We don't want to use this refresh needed items anymore. And we can remove it everywhere here. And maybe in a different place. Maybe we also use it over here somewhere. Okay, so let's remove this. Actually, let's keep it because we need to add something else instead. Let's just keep it for now. Okay, now over here, after we do this, we also add the items into the inventory, the new items, and we remove the items, the requirements, right, from the crafting system. Now at this point, most of these things should work, but we still need to trigger this update UI because we need to always update the UI, and we're going to do this using an event. So inside the crafting system, or actually inside the inventory system, we're going to add this event, so public event action, and we're going to name it on inventory updated. And then we're simply going to trigger it or invoke it each time we need to recalculate or update the UI. So we do this inside the update, let's see, add to inventory method, right? And we can do this instead of this refresh needed items. So over here, we can simply invoke this event. And this will basically trigger the event. And inside the Blueprint UI, we're going to subscribe to this event. So here we can have this on enable, private void on disable, and we're going to subscribe to this inventory system instance on inventory update, on inventory change. And this is a method that we're going to have inside. And inside, we're simply going to update the UI. Now we also want to unsubscribe on disable, so we're going to do minus. And what we're doing, we're basically just subscribing to this event inside the inventory system. So each time the inventory is updated, we're going to call this method, and this method will update the UI. So all the data will be relevant. We also want to call it when we remove an item over here. So instead of this, let's save all the scripts. And at this point, we can remove a lot of these things inside the crafting system. For example, we can remove the references for the buttons. We can remove the not this thing, but this thing, remove the references for the different blueprints, remove the references for the requirements. Also, we want to, okay, this is fine. So now all of this will be not relevant, so we can uncomment all of this. And obviously you can also delete this, but for now I don't want to delete this. So all of this is not relevant anymore. We can delete all of this. So all the green is data that we don't need anymore. You can see this, and also here. Don't need this, and we don't need this very long method. So our crafting system will be much, much shorter, and we're going to use all of these new ones. Also this thing, we don't need it anymore. And I want to show you how our crafting system looks at this point. Let's just delete all the things that we don't need. Now at this point, this is what we have. We have a list of blueprints data. We have references for the crafting screen UI, although I don't think we need it anymore. We're going to get rid of it a bit later. We have a reference to all the actual panels because we want to activate them. We have a list for the different buttons that will actually enable these screens. Eventually, we're going to do this from the UI, from the actual inspector, so don't worry about this. Then we have references to the containers. We have a reference to the prefab. We have our awake. We have our start method, and here we're basically adding these on-click events. So when we click on the tools button, it will open the tools category, right? When we click on this button, it should open this panel. When we click on the basic survival, it should open this panel. So that's why we have these here, but eventually we're going to move them into the inspector. We're going to create on-click events inside the inspector. So this is what we have inside the start method, and obviously we also call the populate blueprints. Inside the populate blueprints, we're going to populate all the blueprints into the categories. And then we have this open tools category, open survival category. Again, we're going to do all of this from the inspector later. When we open the crafting system, we do all of these checks. So we did not touch any of this, right? We did not touch the update method, so you can keep it as it was. And maybe we're going to make it a bit better later. Then we have this craft from blueprint. We have the craft delay, and we have the calculate, okay? So just make sure you have all of these methods and everything looks the way it looks in my code. And now, if I'm going to save this, so now back in Unity, we can see all of these errors, and that's just because we are missing the refresh needed items method. So instead of going and deleting all of them, I think it will be better to just keep this method inside of our crafting system. Let's just add it back again, but it's not going to have all the logic. What it's going to do, it's going to go into the inventory system and simply call this on inventory update, and it will invoke it. Invoke. Let's see what's wrong. Yes, we cannot invoke it, so let's just have a method. Let's have this inventory system instance update inventory. So this is a new method. We're going to generate this inside of our inventory system. And inside, we're simply going to invoke this event, okay? So now, each time we call this refresh needed items, it's just going to update the inventory and it's going to call this event because this is basically what we did before. But now we don't have this unnecessary logic inside the refresh needed items, and also all the different places, all the different scripts that are using this method are still going to use it. And now we don't need to go into all of them and remove the refresh needed items. Instead, we can simply call this method and update the UI. Okay, so you need to have all of this. And inside the inventory system, we did not change anything. We have all the different things that we had before. We have this new event when the inventory is updated. We have the start method. We have populate slot list. We have the update method. We have open UI. We have close UI. We have add to inventory. So let's just get rid of this. Okay, so this is the entire add to inventory method. We have, don't forget to add this event here. We have the check if stack exists and make sure we are updating the inventory slot as well. We have the trigger pickup pop-up. We have the pop-up delay. We have find next empty slot. We have check slots available. We have remove item, which is a big method. And I'm just allowing you to make sure you have all of this. We have the recalculate list. We have the check item amount. And we have, actually, this is an old method that is not working with the stackable system. So we can simply ignore it. We can remove it. I think something is using it. I think our quest system is using it. So don't delete it, but just know that we are now using this thing, get total item count, because it's working with the stacking system. Also make sure you have this entire method, and update inventory just to call this event. So this is all we have inside the crafting system and inside the inventory system. And now let's just close this crafting screen. Let's also make sure that we have this. Okay, let's close this. Let's go to our crafting system. Make sure we have all the different... Now we don't have the other ones. We don't have the different containers. We don't have the refine category, right? We did not add the scroll view and all of this. So you need to do all of this for the refine, for the survival category, for the construction category. And this is basically the same thing we did here, right? We added a scroll view to this area. We added the tools container. We added the grid layout. And inside, we're going to instantiate all of these prefabs. So you need to do all of this for each of these categories and then have the container, the tools container, or the survival container, or the refine container dragged here to be referenced inside the crafting system. Maybe we're going to do this together later, but for now we have the tools container and let's see if it works. Now at this point we may have some issues, and that's just because our tools category is disabled. So when we call this event over here, and even though we pick up an item, this will not be called because it's going to unsubscribe when it's disabled, and it will only subscribe when it's enabled. So as long as our tools category UI is closed, it will not trigger the event and it will not update the UI. So we want to make sure that the UI is updated also when we open the actual tools category screen. And to do this, we're going to enter our crafting system and add the event trigger over here. So refresh this one, refresh needed items. And we're going to call it each time we open another category. Now, obviously, we're going to make all of this much more efficient later because we don't want to do this here, right? This doesn't look good. We're going to do all of this from the actual inspector. But make sure that you're updating the UI each time you open a new category. So now we can finally see if everything is working. If I open the crafting panel, we're going to see all the categories. If I click on the tools category, we can now see the axe blueprint, but this was automatically added. We did not add this over here. This was empty, right? So now each time we're going to have new blueprints, they're going to automatically be added into the tools category. We can also see that the crafting button is not interactable, only when we have all the requirements. So now let's pick up items. Let's pick up a stone. And now we can see that we have one stone. If we pick up a stick, we can see one stick. Let's pick up everything. And now we can see that our crafting button is interactable because we have enough items. We can click on it and the axe was crafted, and now we can equip it and we can use it. And the tree is a bit floating, I think. So we should put it down. Anyway, the crafting system is working. And these categories are not going to work right now because we still need to add the containers and add the scroll view and everything. But we can see that the tools category is empty in the beginning. And it will automatically add the blueprints because the axe blueprint says that the category belongs to the tools category. The plank belongs to the refine one. If I'm going to change this to tools and I'm going to run the game, then the plank as well will go into the tools, and this was automatically added. Okay, so this is a much more efficient way to work with blueprints. So let's bring it back to the refine one. So now it's very simple. If you want to add more blueprints, simply create a new scriptable object, add all the data, add the category, and it will automatically add this into the category. So that's all for this episode. Thank you for watching. If you're still not a subscriber, you can subscribe. You can also leave a like, and you can also become a member of the channel. And I'll see you next time.